Get started on time. Just so you know, this program is also being streamed live on YouTube. So that's what the microphones are home, can hear what's going on. Thank you so much for joining us today for Untangling Our Roots, Experiences with African American Genealogy. A huge thank you to our panelists, who I'll introduce in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to start just by orienting you a little bit to what the State Library and State Archives are, who we are, what we do, before we dive into having a great discussion with our panelists this afternoon. So the State Archives of North Carolina, this is just down the hall from us. If you walk just down that way, you'll get to the search room. And our search room is open to the public from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Tuesday through Friday, and on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and we are closed state holidays. In the search room, you have access to experienced archivists who can provide you with reference help in addition to pulling records. A lot of them have worked there for a long time. They have a lot of great knowledge about our state's records and history. You also have access to the materials that are preserved in Raleigh, with a few exceptions, but those typically don't interfere with genealogy records like wills or estates, court records, that kind of thing. And also access to the State Archives microfilm collection. What a lot of people don't realize is that there are a lot of materials in our microfilm room that actually don't have physical equivalents in the stacks. So there's actually a lot that you can get done in the microfilm room, and a lot of those records are also available on places like Family Search and Ancestry. But it's a really rich resource. The State Archives' mission is to uphold and preserve the records of the state of North Carolina, all its people and places. And the specific records here that pertain particularly to family research are county records. Those are your wills, your marriage records, deeds, estate files. State agency records, these can be things like manumission petitions, change of name petitions in the General Assembly, even down to things like, did your ancestors sign a document to petition for the start of a new county or things like that. Private collections, sometimes which include lists of slave births and deaths, or have family correspondence and photographs. And of course, military collections, which we have a really rich military collection here. There are a lot of remote resources that you can access at home. The North Carolina Digital Collections is a joint project with the State Library and contains many digitized records that can be helpful in your research, including the General Assembly session records up to about 1814, 1816. Selected private collections, and coming soon, cohabitation bonds, which is a really important resource, and that's going to be really exciting to have fully available online. And then we also have YouTube, blog, and social media channels where we talk about things in our collections. We highlight pieces of North Carolina history, provide educational videos and materials. We've got some great genealogy tips and tricks on our blog. And you can find links to all of those on our website. And then finally, the Correspondence Unit, which I used to be a part of until last year, does remote research for both citizens in North Carolina and those throughout the United States and even internationally. There are associated fees, and you can find more about that on our website, but we're happy to search for specific records and provide you copies if you're unable to visit the search room in person. And so if you'd like to contact us, you can find all of this information on our website as well, but you can email us for general questions or requests, give us a call, and our receptionist will get you to the right person, or place orders on our online store. This gives you an overview of the different types of records that we can search for, and you can place orders online there. And now I'll hand it over to Clarissa, but I just want to say real quick, we'll have quite time for questions about everything at the end, including resources at the archives and library. So, thank you, Clarissa. Great. You're fine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Arguello. I'm the outreach librarian at the State Library, and I just want to tell you a little bit about the Government and Heritage Library, which is downstairs. So if anyone after the program can go downstairs and take a visit. So we are also open Tuesday to Friday, 9 to 5, and Saturdays 9 to 1, closed for state holidays, same as archives. We also have our chat services, and they're available at the same hours. And that's all of our contact information: phone, fax, email. And I'd like to encourage everyone to sign up for your library card. So North Carolina residents can sign up for a library card with the link on the slide, and it allows access to many different online subscriptions and databases. You can also sign up for our mailing list to receive general news and updates from the State Library, as well as emails about programs and resources related to North Carolina history, training on data resources such as LINK and SLNC, the community demographic search. We also have biographies and other databases such as JSTOR, and through NC Live with your library card, you'll have access to Access Video on Demand, which are primary source videos, documentaries, TV shows, etc. And we have a ton of educational resources and research guides. And last, I'd like to talk a little bit about NCpedia, which is our online encyclopedia for the state of North Carolina. It's maintained and managed by the librarians at the SLNC Government and Heritage Library, and we have over 8,000 entries. So NCpedia contains information about a wide variety of people, places, and topics that are all relevant to North Carolina. And I'd just like to reiterate, we are on YouTube, and so any questions that anyone has online, they can post in the chat, and we'll save for the end for our Q&A. And I'm going to hand it back to Lauren to introduce our panelists.
All right, let me get situated here real quick. Okay. Thank you so much, Clarissa. All right, well, I'm just such a great honor to have you three here today. I'm really excited to get to explore this topic with you. So first up is Cheryl Williams over here on the right. Cheryl is the founder and president and a self-described history enthusiast who continues a 10-year commitment to education, preservation, and honoring the heroes in our community. Previously the assistant board chair and education committee chair of the Friends of Oberlin Village, she spent her time building community partnerships, managing events that uplift the stories of historic Oberlin Village, and has participated in education and research program development. Ms. Williams is a descendant of enslaved people who decided to settle, build their home, worship their God, and raise their family in what was historic Oberlin Village. Prior to her journey with the Friends of Oberlin Village, Williams spent almost 30 years in financial services, helping first-time homebuyers secure their dream of home ownership. She worked for Bank of America and Chase Manhattan Mortgage in California, where she raised her family. And in September 22, Cheryl started the nonprofit Historic Turner House Foundation, whose mission is to provide programs that educate the community and history lovers of untold cultural and historic stories related to the Turner family and others who reside in historic Oberlin Village in Raleigh, North Carolina. The mission of the Historic Turner House Foundation is to source funding to preserve and restore the physical spaces of this remnant of a surviving freedmen's village in North Carolina that grew out of a free black settlement during the Reconstruction era. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Next to Cheryl is Lisa Withers, a doctoral candidate in the history department at North Carolina State University. She is a historian who values partnering with community members to preserve, examine, and share information about the past. She is experienced in engaging diverse audiences about North Carolina's 19th and 20th century African American history through exhibit curation, public programs, and interpretive tours. Her professional experiences include working in university archives, historic house museums, historic sites, history museums, government agencies, and teaching college-level courses. It's a lot of stuff. Lisa holds a BA in African and Afro-American Studies with a history minor from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MA in history with a museum studies concentration from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She is currently a doctoral candidate at North Carolina State University working on a dissertation studying the people and the communities associated with North Carolina's Green Book listings who help facilitate African American travel throughout the state. And finally, Emerson Foster, a face that I know well from my days in the search room. Welcome, it's great to have you here. Emerson Foster was born in Henderson, Vance County, North Carolina. He's now a resident of Raleigh, North Carolina. He attended Fayetteville State University and after college enlisted in the U.S. Army. After his military career, he moved to Philadelphia, where he lived for several years before moving back to North Carolina. He's been doing genealogy research since 2007. His interest sparked because he wanted to know more about his family and where they came from. This has been a great journey, and it continues. All right. Well, let's get started. I'd love for each of you, maybe starting with Emerson, to just kind of briefly explain your research and what inspired you to get into it.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for having me. They will tell you stories, but they will leave big pieces out. Or either they will try to hide things. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm educating the younger generation in our family, telling them about our family history, and I'm trying to tell the whole story, not leaving out anything. So that's what sparked my interest.
Thank you. It's really interesting. How about you, Cheryl?
Hello, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I too was curious. Actually, my beginning of researching started when my daughter was in the 4th grade. We lived in California, and the 4th grade students, part of their history lesson was to do a family tree. And she got excited about it, which made me excited as a parent, you know, when our children get excited about projects. So she spent time talking to the elders of our family. That was in 2001. This is kind of when this gem or this seed, mustard seed I'll call it, was sparked for me. And we did. We were able to go back pretty far. Then fast forward, I came to North Carolina in 2010. And then in 2012, with my association with the Friends of Oberlin Village, I'm also the cemetery steward. And so we had this idea of telling these stories about the people that were interred, because, you know, people don't know who they are. And it was in that I learned how deep my family genealogy was. And I have to tell you, I'm only on one branch. I'm a neophyte. I'm on my paternal grandfather, but there's three other branches. So I'm real excited to get to that. So that sparks my joy. And because we're in a moment today of real chaos and real uncertainty and a clashing of ideas, I am called to share these stories because I believe we're more similar than we are different. And the backdrop of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment during Reconstruction is really the only time, that 8 years, right, Lisa? That 8-year period was the most equal, if you can call us equal, that we were. So today, I share these stories, I talk about these difficult things so that we can instill some racial reconciliation in particular, and just to have people open up their minds that we are people, we have been people, we are not property, we're never property, and that we have these difficult conversations, but it's good, difficult conversations, because the more we learn about each other, the more that you may have an ancestor that was a part of this history, and maybe your family isn't talking about it either, just like our families weren't. So, yeah, that kind of sparks my joy for this work. Thank you.
How about you, Lisa?
Well, as my co-panelists, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited. How y'all doing today? Aren't we all excited to be? No, for real, I'm really am excited. I've actually been looking forward to this for a few days, but anyway, I'm gonna get to the point. But good afternoon, everyone. My story is a little bit different. It's a two-pronger. So I was blessed to be born to older parents. I was not a planned child. You should hear my mother tell the story. But I share that tidbit information to share that I really do attribute my love of not just genealogy, but just history in general, whether it's community stories or the scholarly discipline of it, to my parents and my family. Because I grew up with an older generation, as already been alluded to, they like to tell stories. And so how I formally got started in doing genealogy, when I started my undergraduate experience at UNC Chapel Hill, I just knew I was going to be a cardiovascular surgeon. So much so, I spent 3 years as a biochem major. Yeah, we know how well that went. But so how this is related is that when I finally switched majors, I attended summer school. And one of the classes I took in summer school in that transition period of changing to a humanities major was a class in the American Studies department at UNC Chapel Hill called The American Family. And it was taught by Dr. Robert Allen, goes by Bobby Allen. And our practical assignment was you had to go back at least 4 generations of your family. In addition to our readings and coursework about the American family and how the American family has its definition, but also how we conceive of it within society has changed over time. And this was also when, now this is before Finding You's Who Do You Think You Are? Is the other and this is when this show was to start coming out. And so one of the, I remember in class of having a discussion as we were talking about where we were on our class project, and talking about, so on the TV show, they come up with all these documents and things. I'm like, we're struggling to find too. Wow. But anyway, I digress. But that's really, so I have been influenced by family stories, and throughout my education, as I pursued additional degrees, a lot of my research is centered on the stories. For example, in my master's work, I did a lot on African American education because of the stories for my family about their pursuit of education, and likewise. And so really the two have come together. So after taking that class, doing my summer school journeys and figuring out who I was going to be as an undergrad, that has stayed with me. So I had the roots, but that class started the tools and started scaffolding. And then since then, on my own, talking with people like Miss Cheryl, who I've known from Mr. Emerson, and then other resources, I would tell you there are lots of good people on YouTube who are board-certified genealogists. I watch a lot of them. I've taken learned from them as well. And other resources online. I have, over the past decade or so, I'm actually hitting beyond a little decade now, of learning how to do it, how to get better at it, and how to go back and verify and correct some of the mistakes I made early on as well. And so I will pause it there. And hopefully be more.
I mean, you perfectly segued into my next question.
Beautiful. All right.
Which is just how did you each learn how to do genealogy research? How did you, develop and hone those skills? So, Lisa, feel free to talk more on that, but I'd love to hear from Emerson and Cheryl as well about their experiences.
Yeah, so I'll actually let my colleagues go first. We'll start with, it started with class and then supplemented on my own online resources, such as, we know FamilySearch.org is a popular website, but many people may not know they have a research wiki that's not just for their website, but for anything, and that has a wealth of information of research strategies, source of document types. I would also like to thank our state library here in North Carolina, because there have been times over the years where I've kind of just like, I saw a tab on the LibGuide, and I was like, let me click on this. What's this gonna give me? As well. But I'm going to stop talking and let my colleagues, if they would like to answer.
would you like to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you again. I too have been very pleased with the different resources. I'm curious/nosy. Okay, so the curious adjective is the nice way to say I'm a nosy person. I like learning. I'm very curious, and I have a creative streak in me. So a lot of the relationships that I have established have been very helpful. So starting just with basically, like I said, with talking to people in my family has been great. Then the different online searches like Ancestry.com, but also Family Search. And there's also now AfricanAncestry.com. A lot of these cost money, and depending on how much money I have, I'm on it or not. But then I have had association with state archives, the different libraries. I'm a descendant from people that were enslaved by Duncan Cameron, so I've got access to the Southern slave papers in Chapel Hill and Stagville, historic place. I don't know if you know the history, but Cameron family was one of the largest slaveholders in North Carolina. So I bring that up because most of the time when you're on TV or you're talking to other genealogists, you know, you can't find information, you can't find information. Well, when you own that many people, you have to have a systematic way of keeping up with them. So we were very lucky, and Stagville's management, state of North Carolina, was very open to sharing his papers. So I opened this door and had, documents about birth records from my great-great-grandmother and her people. I know that my great-great-grandfather was one of 4 or 5 people who made the shoes for the people on the different plantations. Cameron had 5. When he died, his daughter Margaret inherited a lot of my family, and they were valued at about $15,875. I have the document, or a copy of the document, for that. And I work with a lot of people, a lot of different city groups that do genealogy and research, and historians, scholarly historians like Lisa, who lead me in the right direction and teach me ways of getting information. So for anybody that is just starting this, I started with my family, and then my nonprofit, the Historic Turner House Foundation, I've opened it up to other family stories. So I invite people to, if they want to write a little article about their relative. We're not dealing so much with the celebrity. It's more family history is more people like you and me. What was it like on Sundays? How did you celebrate birthdays? Did you do the debutante? Were you a farmer? A colleague said he's from Warrenton County. When my great-grandfather was first freed, I don't know what he was doing, but he had a farm there in Warrenton before he came to what is now Wake County in Oberlin. Yes, so he made the beginnings of his income through farming, and then he was an entrepreneur, came to Oberlin, built his house, helped build the church. These communities that came together, and especially the ones that were able to survive, and I'm not talking about the Wilmingtons or the Tulsa places where atrocities and massacres happen. I'm talking about the communities that were left intact. And there's stories of trauma in that too. In the bright of day, yes, we're all shiny and successful looking, but in the shadows of the evening, the ugliness that's part of America's tapestry kind of comes out at that time. So it's a lot of fun using this. And we're at a time now, I said it before, where there's a lot of interest in our history. How come we never talked about it before? I mean, weren't we important before? The impact that we have had on this country's wealth. You cannot deny it. Of course, if I'm a business person and I have free labor, well, yes, I'm going to be wealthy. Of course I am.
Of course you are.
Of course I am. That's no great feat. That's many years of free labor. So that is a fact, and we have to own that fact. And it's not to berate anybody or make anybody feel bad, but that is the way it was. That was the lay of the land back then. But it doesn't have to be the lay of the land today. It really doesn't. We have the power in all of us to be, have some equanimity in what we do, how we treat each other, how we talk to each other. We all have prejudices on both sides. So these different state organizations, Stagville, I love NCpedia. I found out some stuff about my ancestors. There's a woman in my ancestry who wrote a book, and it's online. I haven't read it yet, but it's online. So there's a plethora of information. And if you're curious / nosy, it's a lot of fun to go through and talk about these things and learn about these things. And I love this kind of forum because I'm able to cross paths with people that we help each other learn new things, and we share our gifts about history with each other. So that's saying a lot. I'll shut up. I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Okay, for me, I'm just like you two. I started out by talking to the older family members. As I stated before, my grandmother would talk sometime about her family, but my maternal grandfather said not one iota. So, growing up with them, especially during the summer months, I got chances sometimes to talk to grandmama when we were sitting out on the porch after everybody finished working, and she would mention certain things. And then I started talking to like my mom's oldest sisters and brothers. They would tell you different things. But as I stated before, they would leave certain things out. Maybe they were trying to hide something. But even today, I tell my mom all the time, I said, well, y'all don't have to tell me. I said, because if it's out there written anywhere in black and white, I shall find it. But the history is out there, and I've gone back on my maternal grandmother. As I told you two earlier, her great-grandmother was named Rebecca Hall from Warren County, and we always heard stories of her. She was an enslaved woman owned by the Plummer family. And all of y'all that live in North Carolina, y'all may have heard of the Plummer family. She was owned by them. She had one child with one of the Plummer men, which is my great-grandfather, Frank Plummer. But she also had 13 or 14 more known children with another man named John Green. As I stated, I said 14 known. She would always tell her granddaughters and her other children, don't be like me. And when you think about it, we say, why would she say, don't be like me? She said that because she had so many children, she didn't know how many she had, which is sad. But we go back to her grandmother, Hannah Hall, which is my fourth great-grandmother. Hannah was born in 1795. She was sold at an auction in 1802 at the age of 6 years old to Governor James Turner, who was the 12th governor of the state of North Carolina. And when you dig into it, as I've been doing the research, I'm like, wait a minute. Governor Turner, he married one of the Plummer descendants. So when I started doing more research, come to find out, Governor Turner is my fourth great uncle by marriage. Then Hannah was sold or either given to Judge John Hall, who y'all may have heard of him also. He was one of the chief justices of Warren County. And I'm trying to figure out, and I've talked to some of my genealogy friends, Bess and them right there. Governor Turner wrote Judge John Hall a letter in 1808 inquiring about the well-being of Hannah. Why would he write a letter to Judge John Hall after she has been sold, inquiring about Hannah and another slave named Prince? Only those two now he inquired about when he had over 200 slaves. He only inquired about those two slaves. So what we did last year, I believe it was, last year, we found where Hannah was laid to rest, and we got together with my cousin Betsy. We went out to the grave site, and it's cleaned up now. And I went to my family, we purchased a headstone for Hannah. So now she is laid to rest properly. So, I mean, things like that, you never know where you can go into genealogy research. And as I tell everybody that's doing genealogy research, you're never going to be finished. It's not a snap your finger, and it's not a, I found this. I've gone back several times and have to correct myself because of the same names. You will run into that. And as I say, with my great-grandfather, Frank Plummer, we thought his father was Dr. Alfred Plummer. But until the family started doing DNA, we were like, wait a minute. The DNA is not going back to Dr. Alfred Plummer, it's going back to his brother, Dr. Henry Lynn Plummer. Come to find out, Dr. Henry Lynn's Plummer's son, Alfred, with the same name, is the father of my great-grandfather, Frank. And we would have never known that unless somebody had done the DNA test. DNA proved it. So when you do research, I mean, documents are fine, and it's more to look at than census records and other records. There are church records out there. There are deeds. There are other documents that you can find your enslaved ancestors listed in these documents. And a lot of people wouldn't think of finding a slave listed in the deeds with the land, but I found it several times. So, I mean, I will end right there. I could say much more, but I'm going to cut it off right there.
I can segue with the resource. So I am going to do a shameless plug for my day job. Well, but it's you mentioned deed and deed records for anyone, and I know earlier before we started the program, there was some conversation happening. So in my day job, I serve as the project coordinator for the People Not Property Project. It is a project through the Digital Library on American Slavery, hosted at UNCG, and that is a part of what we are in the process of doing. We do not have all counties yet, but we are working our way to that. I'd like to say thank you to the State Library for LSTA grant. Thank you so much, because that means this time next year, we will have added Onslow, Northampton, I believe in Halifax County, to our database. So please feel free to see me afterwards. I can give you the web link to it, but that's part of what our database is about. We have a team of people who are going through deed books from registers of deeds and the state archives. And whenever there is a deed found about an enslaved person, taking that metadata and making it available. So anyone who is doing any genealogy about an ancestor, when you hit that pre-1870, what we generally call as the roadblock, that is another resource. And I just wanted to let people know about those, because and honestly, this job is what also helping me learn research strategies for when you hit that. And I think, Ms. Jim, y'all could probably speak more, because you're further along in your family history than I am, the way and how you go about research and doing your genealogy, especially for African American, it changes up. You start with your immediate family, and oftentimes we go through a direct line, but eventually, and what I'm finding for me, I'm having to go outwards to verify information, and then so that I have as much information as possible that I can use to verify when I go past that block, just because I'm having to go from looking at the people that are of interest to myself to looking at to the people who own them and through their records and through their eyes, And so the more information I have that can help me quantify probability-wise, if this the person or is not, that's the information that I would need. And I'll turn it back to anybody else who has to.
Yeah, no, that's another great segue into just kind of challenges and roadblocks you've faced, and what are some examples of those that you've encountered, and how did you push past them? Were there particular things that helped you? Was it walking away? I know sometimes in research, I just got to walk away for a while and come back with a fresh look. But y'all were also talking about earlier how about that's hard to do. So
I would say this right here. As I stated, like I say, a lot of times the family members don't talk. So I had got one of my roadblocks I had gotten to was on my maternal grandfather's grandmother. Her name was Lorena. And the only thing I had on her was her name, Lorena Williams, on the 1880 census. Only document I had. Didn't see her in 1990, nowhere else. So I'm trying to figure out, where is Lorena from? no idea who she was, where she was from, anything. So I had to go all the way back, and I looked back through my great-grandfather Mason Williams' marriage records. Couldn't find anything. Of course, there were no births back during that time, so I couldn't find anything there. So I went back, and some said, go back and check for delayed birth records. I found a delayed birth record for one of my grandfathers, well, two of my grandfather's younger brothers. And all of this time, I'm thinking that my Williams family were born in Warren County. Why was I wrong? On my grandfather's younger brother's birth records, it had them being born in Halifax County, which is one county over. That's why I say when you do your research, don't focus on one county. Look at the counties around that particular county. So I found them in Halifax, and then I went back. My great-grandfather, he was married the second time, and he listed his mother, Lou Banks. I'm like, bingo! So I go searching for Lou Banks in Halifax County. I'm like, okay, there's no Lou Banks. So Lou could be Louisa. It could be Louise. Any of those names, I found no Lorena. So, like I said, going back to DNA, I started looking at some of my closer DNA matches. And I'm like, wait a minute, why is everybody going back to a Peg Ash, a lady who I've never heard of? And this is through DNA. So I started researching Peggy. Peggy had a daughter, Lucretia Ash, born 1818, Halifax County, and they were born free people of color. Lucretia married Isham Banks. There's Banks. They had a daughter, Lorena. And I would have never known that unless I had to go all the way back and basically start all over again to find these people. So that's why I say when you do your research, just don't focus on one area. Look at the counties around where your ancestors lived, and even on the census documents, as I told you earlier, if you're looking for a particular family member, don't focus on that one family. What I normally do, I go 5 pages forward, 5 pages backward, looking for those ancestors. And sometimes you may have to go back further because you will hit those roadblocks. So hopefully that will help someone. I mean, just don't focus on one area.
I know for me, some of the roadblocks are opened up with the new technology or new records that they open up. I had no idea that couples who were enslaved, after they were freed, they had to register as couples. And usually they put their mother and father's name on there. I've got a roadblock right now with, I think, a 5th generation Phoebe and Abner, who I think is my ancestor, but I have no receipts on that, so I'm still trying to figure out what that's about. And when I'm doing research, I'm pulling in all kinds of information, starting usually just online, just Google it and see where it takes me. So for new researchers and if people that have had some experience, just have an open mind, because like we're talking about here, you could start down one road and say, oh, wait, okay, that's not quite right. Let me go to this other source. The other thing that I talk about is, which is a little bit different, is this searching and this curiosity is just not relegated to Black people. I mean, when I'm doing presentations, especially to kids, we're sitting on land that is Tuscarora, Native American land. They are the only people in this country who were here. Everybody else comes from someplace else. Some of us came willingly, some of us did not come willingly. So it's not just a Black or African American journey. It's a journey for everyone. And these same documents and doors and windows that are opened online through the state archives, the libraries, the different historic sites, the schools can open up even, to other people. It's not just one slice of our history. The history that we're taught in school is just so narrow.
Yes.
You know, very patriarchal. You know, there's not a whole lot about what the women were doing, you know, what families were doing, who was moving from here to there. And all of these resources that we're talking about are helpful to anyone who wants to find out about their ancestors.
I can go next to piggyback off my colleagues, and I will bring in two other things. So please hear me out. I'm young, I acknowledge that, but I also remember the days of pre-internet. And I always reminded my students when I used to teach in a university classroom, and even when I used to work at a reference desk and assist patrons, I sometimes remind you, like, we have generations upon generations wealth of materials that was on everything except digital. So while we have a lot of things online, not everything is online. So I definitely, for anyone who's doing genealogy, please, by all means, start there. It's a great starting point, but understand at some point, Ancestry's not gonna give it to you. Family Search, you're gonna have to get in with the rest of us. Roll up your sleeves, bring some Kleenex, a mask, because it can be a little dusty. I mean, granted, I love my archive, I love a good archive, but sometimes, you know, we gotta, but just keep in mind, and so with saying that, and also, and my advice to look at both digital and analog sources, two things. One, learn about different document types. So before my current job, I would have never thought about land record, because like what you're saying, just even how we even talk about slavery, it doesn't always register. And so understanding what are deed book records, what are they for, and how were they kept. Learning where I am now in my genealogy jury, I'm learning, and this also stems from my training as a historian, going deeper into the different types of documents, why those types of documents were created, how were they created and designed and used. Because that gives you another understanding. that can give you clues on how to search for people using that particular document type. Same thing for the census, and I love the census now just because I have a lot more to learn, but I'm kind of like a newbie census nerd. Because like when you're on Ancestry, like for anyone who knows, you type in a name, it gives you a match, and it highlights. It's just a lovely highlight, and you focus in. But I believe, you know, you mentioned it earlier, there are people, what they are doing is they're going dwelling by dwelling by dwelling. Not always in the exact order, but in a close enough order for us, you can kind of know who is all in this neighborhood. And something else that I have, because I also have done work in GIS, which is why I'm very geographically inclined now, I always also look at the top. Then what township are they listed in? Precinct, if there's a post office that's listed, because that also gives me clues, because like you said, especially for African American ancestors, we have some name changes that happen. And sometimes, because I've yet to get into the DNA, so I need to talk with you after about the DNA. I'm late to the game, I understand, but I'm a historian, we like a paper. But that's one of the clues, though. If you're not finding those names, first of all, check to be sure your geographic location. And sometimes, it's something that I've started doing, is paying attention to census maps. And so this is a separate part. You're not going to find it with the actual census. Every 10 years when they do the census takers are going to create a map so they know who is covering what over a particular area of land. So there has actually been a time where I've actually looked up the area where I know an answer is going to be, and I just start from the very beginning and I just go page by page by page. And I have found an answer to that way, because as much as I love OCR, optical character recognition, sometimes it just cannot quite always understand the nuances, particularly when the census enumerator did not want to have nice handwriting. You would think by now
Which most of them didn't.
They did. You would think by now I can do this handwriting with a breeze, but like, no. Even though I'm still studying, like, is that a J or a G? What did they do that there? And so that's another. Sometimes you do have to go manually, even work with digital resources. And I don't want to talk too much. There was another point that I was going to make.
Yeah, but also to piggyback off of you, marriage certificates, death certificates, if military, we are patriots, you know, through all families. The draft cards, you know, the military,
draft cards are
ship manifestos. We all came here on some ship. ship manifestos, so all of that. And some of the best work or the best gifts that I have received is just a student being curious, getting down there and going through page by page these certificates, these pieces of paper that they're reading. And then now with the people, not property, research that's going on, I can imagine those folk, the volunteers that are just taking their time, not only to go through each page, but then reading it. I mean, the way, the handwriting, and then even the words, the language that's used. So there's a lot of meat on the bones, and it's a fun way to just learn more about yourself and more about the people in your community. It also shows us how we're similar.
Yes.
I always try to get back to that. We are more similar than we are different. I mean,
is
right
correct.
now, we're just concentrating on all the differences that we have. We are so similar. We want the same things. We want to raise our kids, educate them, own our homes, worship the way we want, love the way we want, and we can do that. We have to get to that.
It is something else I would like to say as well. And a lot of people wouldn't think that this place will have valuable information. I can't go there now because snakes are crawling, but I mean, but you wouldn't be surprised of the most valuable information that cemeteries have.
Oh,
Yes, the
yes,
tombstones.
cemeteries, yes.
A lot of people don't want to go to a cemetery, but I live to go to a cemetery because I mean, you will have found some information in the cemeteries that people wouldn't think that you would be able to find.
And don't just stay in the manicure portions either.
No, we got to go in the bushes.
I mean, that's also, I mean, yes, joke, but also true. Like I think you were saying earlier, how sometimes you may have that nice little manicure pot, but you may not realize just beyond that tree line, a few more graves might be back there.
That is right.
That's who you're looking for.
Or after you clean them, like I said, I've worked in the Overland Cemetery probably over 10 years, and it was completely overgrown when we started. And now you go there and you can see the different tombstones. And they had plots that are very symmetrical. They had intention with what they decorated the tombstones with. You can find out birth, names, death dates. There's so much information in the cemetery. And we were lucky that we actually have a registry as a place to start with. So at least we have names and dates and sometimes what they did, how they died. So that was a gift that a student did for that. And I say that because a lot of times you don't realize how scholarly accomplishments, i.e. degrees, and grades in class can be done by being a volunteer, helping to do and find out some of this research. And then the skills and the organization that you learn for documentation, it just helps you in whatever your job ends up being when you finish that endeavor.
And mentioning cemeteries and death, while we're talking about that, a lot of you may know and you may not know that on that death certificates for North Carolina wasn't actually required until 1913. Am I right?
Yes.
So if you want to find deaths before then, a lot of times you may not be able to find it. But if you go to Family Search, they have a section with coroner reports going all the way back to 1800. So I mean, you can find a lot of deaths on that as well. I mean, they even have slave deaths.
Yeah. And there's even a department, but I don't know what department it is, because I know that the registry we have, the young lady that did that work, her last name was Hallman, she actually went to wherever they keep the death certificates. I mean, went one by one through the records and created that database.
But I think on Family Search, their death certificates go from, if I'm not mistaken, I know they started 1800, they may go through the 1930s possibly.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And they give detailed information on how the person died, and if the coroner went out, they have like maybe 3 men from the community, just jurors, and they would tell how the person died or whatever happened.
I'll just add to coroner's reports, because that's something that Family Search is getting from the state archives a lot of the time, is that we don't have them for every county. And you can use our online catalog to figure out what counties we have them for and what years. And then also the death certificates, they weren't required until 1913, but they weren't even really consistently filed until after World War II. So a lot of times you'll be looking in that date range where there should be one, but there just might not be one.
Right.
Especially in rural areas, you know, and so there's a lot of issues of disparity there in terms of how people got recorded, but
Yeah.
it's a good thing to remember. I wanted to ask how you go beyond names and dates. You know, you can get so many names and dates. You just got these lists and trying to think about them as people, and how, you know, and how then does that impact you when you know that they were victims of a lot of oppression, and just going beyond those names and dates into thinking about them as people. How's
I know
that
for me,
impacted you?
when I'm looking at the census, and even with the slave papers, when I was able to figure out or find out, well, what did they do? You know, I know my great-great-grandfather made shoes. I know that my great-great-grandmother, she worked in the house. She was in the house. I know that my great-great-grandfather, when he came out, he was a farmer. And then they became entrepreneurs. So just that little bit of information is what they did. And also just learning that the women also participated in that. A lot of the women had their own businesses. They would become specialists. And when you realize that for this area, for Black folk, St. Agnes Hospital, that was the only place that people could go to get sick, to get help for their health.
In this area.
In this whole area. And when I
Well,
say
this part of the
area,
state, okay.
I mean the state. I mean this, well, maybe not the whole
I was
state.
saying,
I
there
might
is
be
Black hospital,
exaggerating.
but when it came to this triangle area that we call today, for
Yes.
several counties, it was on the same.
So when you think about the rural areas today even, where the hospitals are closing down and they have to go so far, who was the midwife? Who was the person in the community that knew how to put together the potions, the medicines to help people get better? You know, we get all these wives' tales, what we call wives' tales, that work. And it's because there was a need, because you didn't have access to medical care in the same way that the white community did. So all of those pieces of information, it gets you get to flush out that skeleton of name, birth date, death date. How many kids did you have? In Oberlin Cemetery, my family has two branches. And now when I was a little girl, they said brothers married sisters. I'm like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, now today I know my great-great-grandfather, he had two women with him. I used to say married, but I say with him because one, she died in like 1859, and then he was put with my great-great-grandmother. The first one, I think she died in childbirth. She had like 13, 14 kids. You know, the unpolite word is breeders. And then the Cameron family sold my great-great-grandmother's first husband. She only had 2 kids with him, put her with my great-great-grandfather, and then she went on to have 14 kids. When I was a little girl, I thought that we were the only ones. I thought that my great-grandfather was an only child. No, he had a bunch of brothers and sisters, and it just so happened, it's ironic that both parts of that family ended up in Oberlin. I also found out that there's other branches. There's a branch in Durham. There's a branch that's now on the West Coast, so you have migration going on. So these stories, this meat that's added to the skeleton of birth date, death date, and how many kids you had and what you did, it starts to grow.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll add to that, what you're saying, a story from, so I'm happy to share publicly my research plans, and I think this helps answer your question. When you talk about those stories, you both mentioned how stories, and using those stories to flesh out beyond just the names and birth dates. So growing up, my mother used to talk about her grandfather. And apparently he had a nickname of Mr. NAACP. He was known as the person going around the community and say, are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? And given the context of this being the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that means something there.
Yeah.
So right now in my research plan, my research law, I have one of the things I'm trying to do is figure out, one, does that chapter of the NAACP still exist? If it does, I'm gonna from like, hi, are you currently a member? How do I find information? Or if that chapter does not exist, my next thing is like, okay, do their records exist somewhere? So that's also another way. When you know there are stories attached to people in your family, start thinking outside of the box, especially when it comes to manuscript collections and private collections and the organizations they were a part of. So that's one. To go on my other side of the family, you know, my father, his mother was part of a primitive Baptist church that unfortunately the congregation has been getting smaller. And so I've constantly been asking him, like, do you know anyone who's still in that congregation? And if just by chance anyone still has papers for that. You know, because that's something, just trying to work your network, your community, people in the community who may know what happened to the records of that organization or whatever that your relative is a part of, because that can help give you some information to go beyond just what is on a census, what is on a death certificate or a marriage certificate, and help you really think of them as people. These were breathing human people. They did things, which some of those things lead us to our roadblocks, because as you were talking earlier, you know, our ancestors were people. They sometimes they were in shenanigans too, and it wasn't always documented. But other times, you know, they lived full lives, and so with or newspapers as well. So that's also another strategy, being that if with the story and how that story's been passed down about my great grandfather, I was like, they also maybe probably. So that's also on my research to do this, to look at some of the area, particularly the black press of the mid 20th century, and just to see, you know, does any of his activities reported, particularly because the black press operated a little bit differently than the white press at that time period. So I just want to throw that out there.
Okay, you were talking about the dates. This is something I always say also, and I tell all researchers this, you know, in my family, the ones that's doing the research. Being African American, don't always assume that your ancestor was enslaved.
Yes, yes.
I thought the same thing about mine, and boy, was I wrong. On my maternal grandfather's side, as I stated, going through his grandmother, Lorena, once I started doing their research and finding more documents, I found that they were free going all the way back to the 1700s, which I never knew. And I mean, it is documented. I have their marriage records where my fourth great grandmother, she was married in 1833, and this was a legally binding marriage. Got the marriage license and everything. And then I have another document that proves that they were free. It's my third great grandfather, Isham Banks. He is buying property, I think it was 82 acres in 1842. So this proves that they were free, because, you know, enslaved people, they wasn't allowed to get married legally nor own property. So, I mean, when you do your research, stretch your mind out and just don't assume.
Yeah.
And the other thing I always say is, and I keep saying it, I will keep saying this, you will never finish. You're never going to finish your research. And this is the last thing, and most people, when I say this, they think I'm crazy when I say it. Let your ancestors lead you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
They may not be here with you physically, but their spirit is still here. And if you sit and listen to them, they will direct you in which way you need to go. Most people don't believe that, but it's absolutely so.
Getting to a little bit more of a, not necessarily technical question, but how do you organize yourself when you have a short amount of time? You know, I mean, we were talking about, it's a rabbit hole, and you can just bury time in going down, you know, looking at these documents and scrolling on Ancestry. But how do you, when you've got a short amount of time to do it, how do you organize yourself?
Just set a time limit. I set a time
Do you
limit.
set a timer?
1 hour, 2 hours, that's
Yeah.
all I'm doing. Because I will get bogged down with it. And I try to stay on the person and not go off. Ooh,
Yes, that's the
go
main
off on a
That's what I was gonna
tangent.
say.
So just setting that time is what works for me.
Yeah.
Cheryl, I was saying, that's what I was gonna say, so I agree with Cheryl, I do the same thing, but I think to also put it in another, use different wording, is figure out what is your research question. 'Cause I'm not trying to get academic, but like Cheryl, like say, you know, I'm going 2 hours, well, you know, in 2 hours, you probably can only find out one or two things, so say like, I want to confirm the death date of this relative. That is your research question, more or less, and so that's what you're focused on. And if you find other things, make a note of it, keep a parking lot. Oh, I have to acknowledge, I'm getting ready to quote one of my professors. Because you're right, we have rabbit holes, so focus on your question, but keep a pad of paper or a Word document up, because you probably will run across other things that are important, but not right now in this 2 hours in the pursuit of this one question. So like I have a box at home that I keep my genealogy stuff in, and I have scraps of paper where I have talked to someone, or for example, I was visiting my parents and my mom was she's telling me about a conversation she was having with one of her cousins, and they mentioned so-and-so, and I'm like, that right there, write it down, and I put it, because I can't research it right now, but I have it, and I have it with enough information that I can provide a citation. That's another thing that we haven't brought up, but I think with your organization, keep yourself organized in such a way that you can cite everything. So I have things that I can write as a citation, whether it's from a vital records document, or even if it's through conversation. I have bits of paper where I've had conversation with great aunt so-and-so. This is the day. I may have a few notes to myself about the context of that conversation and then the meat of what it was that was said. So that way when I can go back, because oral history, oral traditions are just as important and just as valid as written documentation. And I've been in history classes for a number of my life. We go round robin. We can make the argument, but those are faulty because memory fades. Well, documents are also faulty because people have prejudice and biases as far as what they wrote down and what they didn't write down. So both of them. So if you have people in your life right now who are still alive, go interview them right now, and whether you record it with permission, if you record it, or if you take notes, if you write it down, write the information down, put the date on it, some content, so that way, if you're going back and compiling like a book, like Mr. Emerson, he has a book, you can cite it in that way, especially if you're doing it for future generations. I know I'm doing it for my nieces and my nephews, who right now are too young, they don't really care. But they're like 7 and 12, and they're that age. But I know 25 years from now, hopefully they might care. But so when they get this information, every single thing, they know where every single fact came from who said it, to what document it came from, what database or whatever. So I'm gonna turn it over.
And another thing I was gonna say is, when you're doing genealogy research, I say this also: study it. I study my research just like I'm studying for an exam. I could go back to some of those slave documents right now, especially to my plumber ancestors, and somebody could ask me, well, is so-and-so on this slave document? I can name just about every slave that's on that document because I retained it in my mind. You have to study your research to know it. Just don't do it to just be doing it. Do it so you can, if someone asks you questions, you can just call off the top of your head, you would know.
And when you find something, you can also quickly be able to verify yes, no, right,
Yes.
wrong. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something else? Okay, I want to make sure I'm not cutting anyone off because I feel myself getting on a roll. But,
Go for it.
No, I was going to say, because you asked about organization, correct? And so just also the practicalities of this. So when I started out, how my brain, when I was remember, I was a little wee undergrad, wee little baby. And so in my mind, I was thinking about it generationally. So if you think about, if you're storing your information on a computer, how do you organize your files? So I started kind of find out that has become a little cumbersome. So even for myself, as I'm at a process now where I've been doing this off and on for about a decade, and I'm at a good point where it's time for me to go back and first verify information, because now I know way more than I did when I started. But also, so as I'm going back through my verification progress, I'm also refiling things and doing it alphabetically by last name for everyone, regardless of what generation they're in. That's just what works for me. There might be other ways that work for other people, but really try to think through, because eventually your family tree is going to get so big, and then of course if you keep going all the different branches, it's kind of hard to keep them all contained in like this generation, and what is so named by last name. But there might be other ways. I don't know how y'all.
I'm going through something similar myself, because right now all of my stuff is just, in different folders. And so even now I've got so much information that when I go into a folder, it still takes me a long time to go through. So a statistician actually told me that to label it with titles, subject matter, name, date, so that I think one of the state programs is doing it this way. They're going back to their documentation and actually identifying it by title more succinctly, so that I can just go through the titles. I don't have to go through each. Now I have to go open up each PDF, okay, and read it. But title it, put a name to it, and whatever the subject matter is, and try to do that. So that project I'm just starting to think about doing, because I have not done it. With the things that I'm doing for our website right now, I'm gathering stories, I'm going back and gathering information to write little articles for the newsletter. I'm finding that I've got so much information that I really need to have it cataloged a lot better than it is, because I'm spending a lot of time just looking for the document. And that's just on my computer. I'm not even in the other resources that are available.
I guess this means this is where we can plug in our librarian and archivist friends. Workshops, please, on how to best file things.
That's a good
That's what I'm
suggestion.
saying. I love y'all.
Yeah.
Teachers.
I know State Archives just did a wonderful workshop on storytelling. That was about a month ago? Was it a month ago? So I encourage all of you, get it in. What I did, I get on these lists. I was like, do you want to get an email? Yes, I want an email. So I'm on the list. I sign up for the workshops, whether they're online. I run my mouth. And I'm in the community. And so a lot of stuff starts to come to me, and I get invited to do different things that help me with my research and help me to build my brand of what I'm doing. So on that note, I say, before you guys leave today, I did bring a few artifacts. They're out in the hall. I also have a sign-up sheet. I do tours at the Turner House, so there's all kinds of little stories that I share and artifacts. We've got stuff from 1889 in the house, still there. It is a historic house. It's on the National Registry, not only for architecture, but also for African American heritage and history. So add your name to my list out there, phone number, email, and I'll be glad to send you information. And I'm willing to share information. I don't have a problem sharing what I have, what works for me, and what doesn't.
And I was gonna say also, I think everybody here in the library as well, because when I started doing the research on my maternal family, when I was working on my family book, which is over there, I was here every day, Monday through Saturday. And Beth will tell you, for how many years? 3 years?
It seems longer.
It had got so bad, they had told me I need to move my bed in here. But I was here every day from when they open until they close. I mean, you have to do your research. And sometimes, like I say, you have to just keep on going back and forth, especially with the repetitive names. One of the names in my family that always got me crossed up, and this is on my maternal grandfather's side, is Mason. We have a Mason, which is my fourth great-grandfather. He was born in 1808, and I've counted 20 Masons under him.
Yes.
And I
feel
mean,
that pain.
all of those repetitive names, they will get you confused. You will get mixed up. There's Mason, and then there's another name that will get, that's repetitive in my family, it's Nellie. I don't know how many Nellies we have in our family, but there are a lot of them, including my maternal grandmother. So, I mean, you have to do your research and watch out for those competitive names. And if you can't find your ancestor spelt one way, because on the 1910 census for my maternal grandmother, we looking for Nellie, and they got Nella, N-E-L-L-A. And then on a few houses down, there is another Frank Plummer with the same age as my great-grandfather, Frank, on the same street, the same number of children, and some of the same names. And when I look at some of these trees on Ancestry, they got this particular Frank as my Frank. But I can look at the children and tell which Frank is what and who's living next to each other. And on the 1910 census, my Frank is racially classified as mulatto, and this other Frank is black. So you have to look at these little key things to make sure you have the right people, because if not, I mean, you can be messed up.
That's also why keeping good notes and citation.
Yes.
Because even as you find these people, like you said, you know who their children were. That's how you tell. Same thing, birthday. Like I have a similar issue, not as many as 20. I'm thankful, but sometimes I'm like, wait, which one? Because I have relatives where, for example, Otis is a common name. Well, one is Otis, but then they might name the son's middle name might also be Otis. But they may call him that, even though that's his middle name.
Yeah.
And so that's also, as what, going along with what you're saying, please be aware that it's not just your government name, it's also the nickname, the shortened version of a name, whether that's their shortened or the typical shortened version of a name. It's funny. So, I'm sorry, I chuckle saying this because my maternal grandmother was always known by one name. And apparently when my sister was born, they were like, why don't you name her this? And my mom was like, no, that's okay. But then when she died, come to find out, that wasn't her actual first name. That was her middle name. Her actual first name was something else. And mom was like, well, if I'd known that, I might have named her that.
But that's a similarity. In all families, it's customary to name the next generation or the children by a favorite aunt, the grandmother, the father. So that's a way that we are similar.
We carry it down, but when you try to trace it back, you really got to pay attention who it is, and when you're trying to find people, you have to be keep in mind not only variations of spellings, but all the different ways they may have been going by in the house and how they reported that to the census taker.
And how phonetically.
Yeah.
How did the census taker interpret what they heard?
That's what happened with my great great grandmother. She was Cynthia, S-I-N apostrophe T-H-A, and then it ended up being Cynthia, C-Y-N. So yeah, we had to go back through there. So when I'm talking about her, I try to I reference both names when I'm talking about her. But yeah, it's fun.
It's one thing that I'm trying to figure out now, and I've told my genealogy friends here, I'm trying to figure out why my maternal grandmother and her sisters, all of them for their middle names are men names. Okay, my grandmother, Nellie Gray, her sister, Rebecca Columbus. She had another sister named Helen Hall. I mean, all of them have men middle names, so why would they name their daughters with a male middle name, especially Rebecca Columbus? I never figured that one out. So there are I'm quite sure there are reasons. We just have to find out why they did it.
Yeah. Well, I have so many questions I'd love to ask y'all, but I do want to open it up now to the rest of the group here. If y'all have any questions, please raise your hand. Yes, ma'am.
The presentation was wonderful. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. So much you think you're doing stuff, and now I'm learning that there's a lot, you all are so much more organized than I. You did not mention historical newspapers, and some of them go back into the early part of the founding of this country, and of course, the black historical newspapers. The state archives bought 2 of them. I don't know if they still, do y'all still have the Baltimore Afro-American and the Norfolk Journal and Guide online?
The State Library of North Carolina does subscribe to the black
They still do.
newspapers. And the Baltimore paper, is the older between the Norfolk and the.
They don't go
Baltimore.
back very far, but I lived in New York, we got the Amsterdam News, and the ProQuest digitized, 9 of those papers and whatnot around the country. But in addition to the local version of news, you had sections from all parts of the country, and they named people by name, and God bless them, we had a social, and so-and-so was there were flowers here, and it gave us a whole list of names, a whole sense of the life we were living within, as described by black folks, black reporters who were submitting articles to those major newspapers. But y'all didn't mention them in your search for some of your relatives and stuff? Well, I'm just curious, and I don't know much about the local black papers.
I found quite a few of my ancestors and family members in the Norfolk Journal and Guide.
In the Norfolk Journal?
In the Norfolk Journal and Guide. As a matter of fact, my great-great-uncle Solomon Green, he is in there, seemed like every week doing something.
I mean, did it help you confirm spellings or names? That you talked about how many different kinds of ways names came up in your research.
It really did, and it confirmed his place in the community as well. Because there was a family lore that was told about him, and once you started reading these newspaper articles, you find out that it's not so.
Yeah.
And the family lore is, and I can say this because my family, they know, I just come out and tell it like it is. The family lore is that Uncle Solomon, when he moved to Norfolk, Virginia, he was passing as a white man. But when you started reading these newspaper articles in the organizations that he was affiliated with, there's no way he could have been passing. By the complexion of his skin, he could have passed, but I mean, you just have to look at these newspaper articles, and it would tell you the truth.
Another source that we didn't talk about is obituaries. I know in
Yes.
everybody's
Oh,
family,
yes.
you probably, your mom or your grandmother
They
probably
listed
has
everyone.
everybody who died. You got a program from the funeral. So that obituary that's on there is usually pretty accurate in terms of spelling and dates and just what the people were doing. What was their accomplishment? What did they like to do? What were their hobbies? So even something as simple as, the obituaries in the drawer in your grandmother's house, that has a lot of information.
So I'll jump in because I know I mentioned black press and the white press, but I didn't mention any by name. And so on top of the ones that you had mentioned, which are more of your nationally recognized black newspapers, also look locally. So I would like to give a shout out to Digital NC, the Digital Heritage Center of North Carolina, funded partially by the State Library. Y'all make sure I tell this information right, please. Funded by the State Library, but housed at UNC, correct? Okay, I will make sure I get my information right. But they have a handy dandy feature to where you can set your search filter to search just the black newspapers of North Carolina, especially if you're looking in a particular time period. I found that helpful for other research projects as well, looking for other people. But I would say, in addition to national newspaper, also look in your local newspapers, the student newspapers. So if you know where your people went to high school at, if they had a newspaper, see if they wrote articles or mentioned in articles, or in these yearbooks. Yearbooks are also another resource, especially if you're looking for pictures. Now, what did they look like when they were younger? I'll tell you this real quick. So the high school where my father went has their own little mini museum. And so I had a chance to go in there with my dad, and he was like, who's that person right there? And I was like, oh my goodness, that is you. I've never seen you look that young before. Look at you there. But my point being, especially if you're creating something for the future generations, we have stories and we can imagine, but there's also that visual element. So particularly you have your book that's over on the table, I was looking at it earlier. If you're compiling things, if you want to have something tangible to have them, in addition to the paper documents and whatever narrative, if you're someone who likes to build a story based off the information you found, look for pictures that you can also include in there, because that also helps. And it's really interesting, even for some of my older, the 2 or 3 generations that we have pictures, I'm like, so that's where we get our cheeks from. Okay, that's what so-and-so. So I'm gonna pass it on.
And y'all were talking about schools. My maternal grandmother, she went to Episcopal school operated by the Episcopal Church in Warren County. And you can reach out to these churches, and a lot of times they might have documents. But the school started, I want to say, in the late 1800s. And she, every time we would pass by there, we would be riding. She would say, "Oh, that's where I went to school." So we visited there. When was it, last year? We went there. We went last year, and we talked to some of the people of the church, and they named some of the families that went to the church, to the school there. My grandmother, she started in 1909, and her tuition was 25 cents per week.
Ooh, can we bring that back?
Yes, her tuition was 25 cents a week. It was a private school operated by the Episcopal Church. So I'm just thinking about my great-grandfather, Frank. He had 6 or 7 children going to the school at the same time. And what you looking at, maybe $3 per week?
Wow.
During that time, most African Americans weren't even making $3 a week.
That's true. Yeah, keep it in
So, I
context.
mean, when you look at things like that, it also tells their place in the community.
Yes, it does.
So, I mean, things like that you can take into consideration also in your research.
I want to plug one thing, OGS, the Afro-American
Yes.
Historical and
Genealogical
Genealogical
Society.
Society.
Yes.
Yes.
A Raleigh
Yes.
chapter that's sort of AAHGS.org. And there's a Raleigh chapter, a Raleigh-Durham kind of chapter and stuff. But folks go up to when there's a county that was very, very, very big. Granville, was it Granville or something? And then they chopped it up into smaller counties.
Yes, Granville.
A lot of them
And
were.
so a number of our members go up to
Roxborough?
thank you, Roxborough and those kind of places, looking for ancestors, looking for funeral homes and cemeteries and stuff, and are helping to do stuff. So those folks who don't have a genealogical research home, OGS is, and they have an annual convention nationally and stuff. I now know where I saw you, Lisa. Actually, I heard you on one of the state things talking about the property,
Oh, people not property?
people not
Yeah,
property thing,
yeah.
and how many counties you had started to do that for.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I know that the Stagville Historic Site, if you are a descendant from the people that were enslaved there, they will help you with finding that. And actually Saturday, if there's anybody here who is descended from those plantations, all right, Saturday from 5 to 8, they're having the second annual private celebration for those descendant families. And I say private right now because it's still very emotional. Eventually, that program will be included in Stagville's all-day Juneteenth. But it was wonderful last year. I'll be there this year, and the theme is Say My Name. So all of these people that contributed to the wealth of the Camerons, their descendants will be able to share their family stories. And so if anybody here is descended from enslaved people from Duncan Cameron and his crew, join us.
I got it, yeah.
Join us.
So, I know Stagville oftentimes gets a lot of recognition, but people in the back can correct me. I believe also if your family comes from Somerset Place, that's also another, Somerset is in Crestville, North Carolina, is east, way east.
Okay.
Beyond Williamston? Beyond, yeah, what county is, Creswell, that's even further west than Northampton, eastern Northampton County. It's right there almost where the Great Dismal Swamp is. But anyway, yeah, it is. That's what I say. When I say east, I mean like you going like we rural North Carolina east. Yeah, so it's Somerset. But I just also want to just bring that because you mentioned talking about Stagville. Somerset was also another place where there was efforts to connect with descendant families.
Yeah.
So if you know that your family is from, especially northeastern North Carolina, and you have no place, that might be a place to start looking and contacting the folks there, and just see if perhaps that's where you.
Okay, something else I would like to say. We're talking about families connecting. I have my cousin Betsy Haywood here. Thanks for coming, Betsy. And she is related to me on my paternal side through the Hawkinses. And what is it, like every 3 months? Every 3 months we'll get together and we'll do a Hawkins and Haywood dinner.
Oh, good, yes.
And she is a Hawkins descendant. I'm a Hawkins descendant on my paternal side. So we get together, and Rosetta, and Bessie, she lives in the historic Haywood house right over here.
Oh.
So we have a ball. And Bessie, can you tell a little bit about our gatherings, if you don't mind?
Oh, yes, well, we,
Hold on.
Yeah, what's the connection? Yeah,
you mean, how did we get to know each other?
yes. How'd you
Your
find out you were
ancestors.
related? How'd you find out you were related?
I was seeking more information on my Hawkins ancestors from Warren County, and they were also from here in Raleigh, and they all lived up on North Blunt Street. And I don't have any Hawkins Y DNA anymore. And so I sort of reached out on the websites, and first I met Renata Sanders, who some of you may know, she's a genealogist, and I met Emerson, and then I met Rosetta, and how did we first get together? I'm trying to remember.
I wasn't at the first dinner. I came to the later dinners.
I came to the second dinner.
She came to the second
Yeah.
dinner.
We had the first one at my house, and we called it Hanging with the Haywoods and the Hawkinses. And it was, y'all, it was wonderful. It was half of the white Hawkins, half of the black Hawkins, some in between, some Haywoods mixed in, some other groups, and we feel like family, and we are family, and it's amazing as a white person to hear the rest of the story that I always knew was out there, but you know, my ancestors didn't talk about it, but it is so enlightening. I too am an American Studies major from Carolina, and that was, and that was when I first got interested in it. But we just have a great time. We go up to Warren County. We look at cemeteries. We're trying to find the Montmorency slave cemetery where her people are buried. Her people were enslaved by my great-great-aunt's husband, Pretty Billy Williams, as were some of your people, right? That is sobering, and that is heavy, but I think we're beyond the uncomfortableness because we're family. I mean, it's awesome.
That's good.
and
Well, you're further ahead than some of the rest of us, you know. I mean, we might know about each other, but I know for my family, there has not been any communication with the slaveholding family.
Right.
I
And
should say yet.
And y'all, I'm sure it's awkward, and I don't think it's necessarily arrogance. I think it's some shame on the part of the white people. I mean, my slave records were just recently transcribed, and they're in the archives. These are the Haywood slave records, and I believe Dolores Williams, some of you know Dolores, and she transcribed some of them. They sat in my house for over a century, and I would say to my dad, "Don't we want to share these with archives?" And he said, "Betsy, it's not a good memory, just let's let it rest." And I kept thinking, there are people out there who want to know about their ancestors. And one of the most amazing moments of my life as an adult were when we had one of these Hawkins and Haywood's dinners, and a man named Gary Franklin, who lives in Ohio, had relayed to Renata that he was looking for his brick wall. He said, "I'm looking for my ancestor who was enslaved by Eleanor Hawkins Haywood." And he's telling this story in Ohio, and Renata stands up and goes, wait a minute, that's my cousin Betsy." And so Gary came over, and I got out the slave records, which I did with some trepidation because I didn't want to offend or hurt feelings, but I did. And Gary and I stood over those records, still gives me chill bumps, and he looks down the page and he goes, that is my great-great-great-grandmother, Curtis, and all of her children. He said, this is a whole branch of my family that I never knew about. And I looked at him and I said, I really feel awkward and I feel embarrassed and ashamed, even though I can't help what my ancestors did. And he said, I don't. He said, this is the best moment of my life. And we've remained friends since. And there's also that association with Lunsford Lane. All of y'all know about Lunsford Lane. He too was enslaved by my great-great-grandmother and bought his freedom. And there is a professor from NC State I recently met. Do y'all know Craig Friend?
Oh, yes.
And he
Yes.
came over the other day, and he we talked about Lunsford Lane, and he knows more about Lunsford Lane than I ever knew. He knows what Lunsford did after he left Raleigh. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. He also knew about the darker aspects of my white Hawkins family that I never knew, but I accepted it, and we had a great time. And it's interesting, y'all. Craig is writing another book called The Haywoods and the Myth of the Great White Man. So, and Craig is a white man. And so when he came in, I said, I'm so glad to meet you. I said, but are you canceling my family? Is that what you're doing? And he said, no. He said, but I'm trying to tell the whole story. He said, as a public historian, I tell the whole story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is what we all do too. And it is, I'm just telling y'all, it's wonderful if you can ever reach out and get to know each other, because as you said, we have way more similarities than we do differences.
Yes, we do.
And I'm going to say something that's, I'm going to make you all laugh. I'm going to make you all laugh at this one right here. Y'all mentioned Mount Morenci. Betsy, Rosetta, and I, we went out trying to find Mount Morenci last year. The only thing we found was a bunch of briars.
Tell them about when we met Rosetta's cousins.
Yes, that too. I mean, we do so much together. I mean, Betsy, Rosetta, and I mean, it's just all of our group. How many of us is it, Betsy, in our group?
15 of us.
About 15 of us.
Yeah,
Betsy will host a dance at her house sometime, and sometime I will host at my house. And I mean, we'll sit there, we'll talk about family, and sometimes we'll bring documents. Last time we had to dinner at Betsy's house, and I requested that everybody bring one of their favorite documents. And we went around the room and we talked about.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I mean, we had a good time. So we do things like that, and I said we get together, every 3 months, and we have a dinner together.
But when we went to Warrenton, Rosetta has 2 cousins up there, and they were going to allegedly tell us where the cemetery was, but they misguided us. But when we came up, was it you who introduced us? She said, this is my cousin Emerson, and this is my cousin Betsy, and her cousins were looking at me like, what?
I will say, and because I know our time is running out, I will say, as a history person, when you are looking at the documents that have to do with your family, the emotion does come up.
Yes.
It does. But it gives me a confidence to talk about it. It gives me a feeling of self-worth. And so when I'm confronted today with negativity or images, I know the truth about my family and that they were good people, hard workers, and their impact to not only Raleigh history, but just American history or global history is so great, and that gives me a feeling of self-worth that I didn't have before I knew this. So it is wonderful that we're able to have these conversations in this way and learn about each other.
Different things. Midwives play a
Yes.
large part
Yes.
Yes.
of everything. My mom, I was born in St. Agnes.
Yes, me too.
Anyway, my mom was 98, and of all her siblings, when time came for Social Security, and to get all of that worked out, she was the only child that we could not find a birth certificate for. And that devastated her, because all of her siblings and what they did, the government did, was to look at her school record. And we found out when she started school and when she left. And then my aunts and my uncles, we knew that she was born in between those children, and that's how they came up with the birth date of her. But the flip side of that it's just like you said, when we went to the cemetery, there were so many Oscars and so many, they had the same names.
Yes.
And so we just assumed that that's our grandparents' grave, you know. So it is, when you talk about the names,
Yes, it's
and they
real.
use the same names, and a lot of times the midwives, they couldn't spell. They didn't know, they got the years, they got the months mixed up, so. Because after all, they were going around to neighborhood to neighborhood to
Yes.
neighborhood, delivering children. So
Yes.
I just want to interject that.
Thank you for
And
that.
this is the last thing I'm gonna say. Betsy and I and Rosanna, we went out to the Hawkins house last year as well, because we were visiting plantation houses. And we got to the driveway, and I said, I'm not gonna knock on the door. Rosetta said, I'm not gonna knock on the door. We were all scared to knock on the door. Bessie said, I'm gonna knock.
Yeah.
Bessie
'Cause you
went to the door and she knocked, and surprisingly, the people that owned the plantation house, they invited us in and gave us a tour. I mean, they were so nice.
I said, we're all Hawkinses, and this is where my great-great-great-grandfather lived, and they said, come on in, and it was just a wonderful
Yes.
visit. But I can certainly understand their reluctance, because I know what you all have been up against at
Yes.
times.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Big thank you to our panelists. Just such a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you to the almost 100 people who watched online. Sorry we didn't get to a couple of your questions, but thank you for tuning in today. And if y'all would like to share your contact information, would you like to just do that personally, or
You can come up to
just
me.
come up and ask? Okay.
And I have information out on the table, so
Yeah.
feel free to contact me at any time. Yes, yes.
All
And
right.
if anybody wants to look at my family book, it's right over here on the table. So,
Please
All right.
do. Lots of good ideas.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming.
thank you.
Such a pleasure. Yes, thank you so much.